Dear chess friends, let me ask you a question. Who are the top 3 chess players in the world? The best chess player in the world is, of course, Magnus Carlsen. The second best chess player in the world is, of course, drunk Magnus Carlsen. And the third best chess player in the world is, of course, late Magnus Carlsen. The Magnus Carlsen that comes late to his games and then loses, of course, some time in the beginning because his opponent has already started the clock. But even this Magnus Carlsen wins these games. I've seen it many times where Magnus is coming late even to some blitz games, some rapid games, and still outplays his opponent. Although, as we mentioned, he lost some time in the beginning, and Magnus is simply a spectacular player. He can do whatever he wants to do, but still, of course, the strongest chess player in the world. And that's exactly what happened today. Magnus was representing today his country, Norway, on the first board in the Chess Olympiad in 2024 that's going on now in Budapest in Hungary. And Magnus Carlsen was again late. He was asking for directions and it was raining outside. He was on his bike and someone told him that he's still not late, that he still can come to the event because the games were a little bit postponed. I have a beautiful picture here by Magnus Carlsen riding his bike. As I said, it was raining outside. He was probably wet and still played a perfect almost game here today against his opponent Roberto Garcia Pantoja, the first board of Colombia. So I prepared now this game. In my opinion, beautiful attacking game again by Magnus with really great opening strategy, great middle game tactics, again also with cool ideas in the later stage of the game. So put your seatbelts on and enjoy in a spectacular gameplay by late Magnus Carlsen. So with the white pieces here, Roberto Garcia Pantoja opened with move e4. Magnus' response was c5, knight to f3, e6, d4. So far we have the French variation of the Sicilian defense, and now the move a6 here by Magnus, which is now the so-called Khan variation, not allowing in some lines, of course, the knight to come to b5 and then maybe later to the square d6. We have now c4, the Maróczy bind by Roberto Garcia Pantoja, simply keeping an eye on the d5 square, not allowing something here to happen. We have now knight to f6 by Magnus. Roberto Garcia protects now the pawn on e4. We have now queen to c7 and now bishop to e2 again by Garcia. We have now b6. Magnus prepares now to fianchetto the bishop, calcing, and now finally bishop to b7. Here Roberto Garcia plays f3, protects now the pawn, which is now the common setup, I would say, in the Maróczy bind, keeping, of course, a healthy structure here. Also, what you're trying to do maybe later is to play the move b3, bishop to e3, rook to c1, queen to rook to d1 is, I think, a solid setup always in the Maróczy bind for white. We have now a knight to c6 by Magnus, challenging the knight on d4, and now Roberto Garcia, I think, doesn't play maybe the optimal way here. He plays now knight to c6, which is, in my opinion, a little bit unnecessary. Maybe a slightly better way to proceed is to play knight to b3. You're keeping still your d4 square protected, but what you're not allowing is here the bishop to come to c5, because we have to mention, because you played f3 and e4, you have now several dark square problems here. The bishop could come into the game. So that's why I think keeping the knight here on the board would be a little bit more complicated to play for black, although probably Magnus knows this theory, and probably Magnus knows, of course, the best continuations even after knight to b3. After knight to b3, actually here black can even go with knight to a5, which is, I think, very interesting game. The game becomes unbalanced, the structure is asymmetrical, the structure becomes now really open, and of course black has then also some ideas to attack on the b file, but I think the game would have been more interesting after potential knight to b3 by Roberto Garcia. So here after knight to c6 he took, Magnus of course takes, and now queen to d3, h5 by Magnus. He's preparing now really tricky stuff. He's preparing actually here even to jump with the knight on g4. He's preparing somehow to fix this knight. First of all, he will exploit now the dark square problems after bishop to e3. Look at this, bishop to d6 here by Magnus, and now Roberto Garcia is really forced to play now the move f4, which is now leaving, of course, also some weaknesses behind, and that's why Magnus plays a beautiful theoretical novelty, a move that we haven't seen so far in chess history. Great opening prep here by Magnus, knight to g4, and knight to g4 should be met here by bishop takes g4 immediately by Roberto Garcia. Unfortunately for him, he didn't play this move, but I wanted to show you how tricky also this position is for now for both sides. After potential bishop to g4, then after h6 g4, obviously the h file is now opened. Now after something like queen to e2, it's very hard for black now to defend the pawn on g4 because you cannot play f5. If you play f5, then of course e takes f5 will happen. You cannot play e takes f5 because of the discovered attack here by the queen, and maybe bishop to b6 can happen and you lose the queen on c7 with the discovered check. So it would be then game over here for black. So that's why for queen to e2, in this position that Roberto Garcia should have played, Magnus would probably castle and would actually lose a pawn. But then maybe f5, e takes f5, rook to f5. Actually, it's an equal game, although black lost a pawn, but has now still this powerful bishop pair on the board, which could be very devastating then for white to handle. But white is up a pawn and has to, of course, now defend his position. But after knight to g4, what Roberto Garcia played, he played now the move e5, which is not good, which leaves, of course, now also some weaknesses here on light squares especially. Now after move e5, Magnus retreats, bishop to e7, and you see now the light square bishop becomes a good piece here by Magnus Carlsen. Bishop to d4, d6. Magnus doesn't want to tolerate any spaces that white gained here. You see Magnus is breaking immediately the strategic advantages here of Roberto Garcia. We have e takes d6, bishop to d6, and now bishop to f3. And now comes also, I would say, critical moment of the game here. Magnus, after bishop to f3, rushed also. He played now bishop takes f3, which is not, again, the best solution here for black. The best way is really tricky line, but I think only the Stockfish engine can play like this. After bishop to f3, what actually black should have played, which is really crazy line, but wanted to show how spectacular already this game is. Now black should not take, black should actually go with queenside castling here. And now after something like bishop takes c6, you don't pick up even the bishop on c6 here. You first play bishop to f4, attack further the h2 square, and then white has to simply sacrifice now the rook for the exchange. But now the real fun starts. Look at this. After queen to f4, black is threatening a dangerous check on h2 and is also threatening to get the piece here on d4. In order to stay in the game, you cannot play here rook to d1. This is not an option because of e5, and then you see the queen is lined up on the d file and you could lose decisive material. So in order to stay in the game after queen takes f4 here, this wasn't playing the game, but I wanted to show really the beauty of this line. Then white has to play here a stunning knight to d5, allowing even queen takes h2. Then after king to f1, you pick up here the knight, and now after something like c takes d5, this pawn is hanging. There is also the checkmate threat here, so that's why black has to play now the move b5, and here I would stop. It's really an unclear position now. Both kings are very endangered. Of course, there is also the option of queen to h1, but then white will start to march towards the queen side here. So very tricky position. So Magnus didn't want to complicate things. He simply got rid of this bishop on f3. Here we have queen to f3, and now after kingside castling, I would say here black is slightly better because of the better bishop that's attacking this pawn on f4. If you play something like g3, then you're vulnerable here again. I would say white's king is more in danger than black's king. So we have here knight to e4, and that was maybe a new unnecessary move by Roberto Garcia. It is a beautiful attacking move. It's doing something. It's threatening, of course, to get the knight here, maybe even deliver some checkmates on h7. But what you're doing here is actually leaving now the c4 pawn unprotected, and Magnus says, okay, thank you, I still can take it out, because even if you try knight takes d6, then I have queen takes d4 with a check, and you lose the piece on d6. So this is not working. So that's why for queen to c4, Roberto Garcia had to protect now first of all the bishop on d4, but Magnus simply gained the pawn. And now Magnus says, okay, I will retreat, bishop to e7, perfectly fine, and with this move I'm controlling also the knight that could jump, of course, on this amazing square on g5. We have now b3 by Roberto Garcia, queen to b5, a4, queen to b4, h3, kicking away the knight, knight to h6, and here what Roberto Garcia should have played is a simple bishop to f2, where pardon me, here bishop to f2, where after potential knight to f5, you're controlling again maybe here the knight activity. That was the only way somehow to stay in the game. But Magnus gained the pawn, tricked him with the sequence, and has still, I would say, even in this position, a much better situation for him. But what Roberto Garcia after knight to h6 played, he played bishop to c3, which is of course an attacking move, but now queen to b3, Magnus simply grabs another pawn. We have now rook to d7. What you could try here maybe is queen to h5. Seems tempting, and it seems so that you're doing something maybe with knight to g5, or you're doing something there, but then actually white can simply, black can simply continue with rook from a to c8, will attack the bishop, and then you're trying maybe some tactics, bishop to f6 to somehow, I don't know, get the queen somehow here, but black even taken this position. After queen to h6, we play queen to e3, forcing knight to f2. And again, I think black is out of this tactical mess. Black can simply defend this position with f5, getting the bishop into the game. This pawn is weak. Rook will come into the game. We can, of course, also use the rook as a defensive piece. So not a good continuation, of course, even in this scenario for white. After queen to b3, that's why Roberto Garcia played rook to d7, attacks now the bishop. But now another beautiful move by Magnus, knight to f5. It seems so again that maybe white has something with move g4, but Magnus calculated everything in a good way. Here Roberto Garcia didn't play immediately the move g4, he'll play it later, but even after move g4, knight to h4, attacking the queen, then we pick up this one. If you pick up maybe here this piece, then we can pick up also this one. You pick up the knight, then queen to e3 again. There's always this check, and you get the piece back. So that's now the issue here for white to handle. So after knight to f5, that's why we have now rook to d1 here by Roberto Garcia, rook to d8. Magnus competes now. You cannot take, of course, this one, because then first of all you lose the rook on d1. So after rook from a to d8, now finally Roberto Garcia played g4, knight to h4 again by Magnus, queen to e2, queen takes a4, and again this issue, you cannot take the bishop, because then here the rook is hanging on d1. After rook to after queen takes a4, rook to d4, played by Roberto Garcia. Magnus protects now finally this piece. We have king to h2, rook takes d7, rook takes d7. A nice simplification here by Magnus Carlsen. Rook to d8, and now rook to a7, going for this pawn on a6, but Magnus simply plays h takes g4, continues his pressure. We have now h takes g4, and now knight to g6. A simple threat idea here by Magnus, going for the f4 pawn. White is pretty much forced now to play the move f5, but of course now bishop to d6 is coming in. Whatever you do, for instance, if you try knight to d6, this wasn't playing the game, but then queen to d6, you have to go here, knight to f4, for instance, the fork. Even if you step back here to h1, if you don't want to get this royal fork, then queen to c6, new check. Then again the knight is coming, you're trying to do something like this. In a simplified line, again, we have to mention that black is much better. Black has gained extra material, has of course even the opportunity to get the rook into the game. So game over in any line, I would say, here for white. So that's why from bishop to d6, here Roberto Garcia didn't pick up the piece, step back simply with the king on g1. Magnus delivers a new check. Queen to e1 here by Roberto Garcia, and now Magnus found another stunner here. The queen is temporarily hanging, of course. Magnus played now a beautiful bishop to c5. Great tactic, because if you try, of course, knight to c5, then you get rook to d1 and you lose the queen. Very wild stuff. So still the knight is hanging, but Magnus continues his attacking flow. After bishop to c5, we have knight, king to g2. Now knight to h4 comes with a beautiful attack. What should you do? You can take the knight, or you can try maybe to play king to h3. Even if you play king to h3 here in this position, then rook to d3. First of all, the check, you cannot go here. King to h4 is not possible because of queen to h6 checkmate. So you would be forced to cover, and then we pick up the queen. Then we go with the knight here, attack the bishop. Then we line up maybe here the bishop against this knight. When maybe this bishop moves somewhere, the bishop is actually even out of game. So game over, I would say, again here for white. So that's why after knight to h4, Roberto Garcia didn't play here king to h3. He picked up now the knight here, but again, beautiful check here by Magnus. King to f3. Now the rook is coming, and here Magnus calculated everything in a good way. Queen to d1 lead to amazing checkmate here on the D and E file. Amazing stuff by Magnus Carlsen. He was late, but he played such a brilliant attack. Incredible chess again by the strongest chess player in the world, by Magnus Carlsen. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas here of the Khan Sicilian by Magnus Carlsen. He gained a couple of rating points also while playing, of course, on the first board, because we have to mention Magnus is not playing now so often this classical time events. Now he gets some points, and I hope he'll continue to play for Norway in the Chess Olympiad in Budapest in 2024. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. If you want to see some other beautiful commented chess games here on my YouTube chess channel, check out our playlist. And if you want to see more sharp or brutal tactical games like this, check out our commented chess games played by computers, where we analyze some beautiful AI games. And if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos, and what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.